For the last year, we've done 7 real-life experiments on real pilot projects. So a lot of the learnings from those projects is what you see in the final methodology or the ready-to-go-live methodology that I'm about to tell more about. Having said that, the essential, the whole core of Project Half Double is still the same. So it's still very much about focus on impact rather than the actual deliverables of the project. It's still about creating flow in the project rather than optimizing the operational business. And it's very much about creating leadership and not thinking this is just management of system. So those core thoughts have followed all along, but there's been a lot of changes in the actual approach of how to do it. And that's why I'm going to use a little effort on explaining how does it look like today. So before I get to that slide, I want to make one thing very clear, because we're not using a lot of efforts to make this clear, but I just want to say it very directly. We're not trying to discard the current project paradigm. We think it works. As you can see, it works on 30% of projects. So we're not saying forget about it, don't do it. What we're saying is that you should choose wisely what you want to use from that paradigm, and you then add the extreme focus of impact, flow, and leadership. In fact, we have discovered that if you know nothing of the classic paradigm or the traditional paradigm to start with, you're in trouble. So you want to have that foundation with you. So I think that's a very essential thing to communicate, because it's not really written anywhere. But that's our approach. So when you know that, you can build upon impact, flow, and leadership. Okay, here it is, and it's called a methodology and not a method. We've been discussing this quite a lot, because in Danish we really haven't got this distinction. But in English you will find this distinction, and it's pretty important. A method would be a prescriptive, directive, normative 1, 2, 3 approach for how to do things, whereas a methodology will be a concept that would gather principles, it would gather ideas, it would gather tools and methods into one. And then you would have to apply that in a way that will make sense in wherever you apply it. So that's the main reason why we call it a methodology. This requires people who can think reflective while they're actually doing the project. And that's a very essential part of Project Half Double, because one thing is that you have to reflect upon the way you work, but you also have to create a change in mindset, with the people you work with, because they're used to do a traditional kind of project approach. So it requires a lot of reflection as you move along. So that's also the idea of calling it a methodology. We don't think that this will work just out of the box in any project. We need people to think brightly about how to apply it to the individual project in the individual organization that you're part of. Okay, so that's why it's a methodology. Long speech, but it's very important to say that, because otherwise it's hard to make it work. If we look at the concept as it is, it's built up with a core, where we have 3 core elements of impact, flow, and leadership. And the core elements are we're non-negotiable on the core elements. So if you want to make Half Double work, we will have to do impact, flow, and leadership, and we will have to stick to the principle that's bound into each of the core elements. So for instance, for impact, the main principle is that stakeholder satisfaction is the ultimate success criterion. We are non-negotiable on that part. We are very firm that that's the way we want to manage or lead the project. However, the further out we get from core elements into the method part, into the tools, and further on to the local translation, the more flexible we become. So the core is firm, and the further you get out, the more flexible. Okay, so for each core element, there will be 3 methods associated to make that principle happen in real life. So for instance, for impact, we have a method which would be kind of, a way to approach and make impact happen in real life. That would say you need to have a business impact described or an organizational impact described, and you would need that to work together with a behavioral change. That's the method. You would need to identify what behavioral change will drive the change and create the business impact or the business value. So the idea, that's the method. And we have a tool called the impact case that can do that. If you have a tool called business case that would also embrace behavioral change, that's the one that we're going to use. So again, the further we get to the local translation, the more we want to use what you're already doing. We just want to make sure that that tool or that approach would actually embrace the behavioral change as well as the organizational impact or the business impact that you want to create. Okay? So that's how it's built up, and I think it's important to understand the distinction because we become more and more flexible, because we really want this to work in the local environment. Because we figured out that translating it into where you are is the key to actually have the half-double impact. Good. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through, first of all, impact, then flow, then leadership, each of the three methods that we would use to make the principle happening. Good. The first one is the impact case. So the first method is, as I said, to use the impact case to drive behavioral change and to get the business impact. You can know a little more, you can get more in-depth into, there's a tool station over here when we get to that part, but because I've already talked a little about it, I'm going to go to the next one, the next method, which is to design your project to deliver impact as soon as possible with end users close to the actual solution. So we call it the impact solution design. And I would argue that this element is the one that we've been changing a lot along the way. We've started out with some thoughts and we've ended up with this. And it turns out to be very effective. The idea of the impact solution design is to design an overall kind of plan for your project on how you will deliver value early on. So reduce the time to impact. So for instance, if you're doing a website, and it takes you 4 months to create all the content for that website, why not launch a launch page, which is just a one-page thing, after a month with the most important information, so that you can start creating impact as you do the rest of the project. That's the core idea. So to get to the impact solution design in more complex projects, usually you would have to invite subject matter experts, people who would know something about this solution, to discuss very early on how can we approach this in a value-creating mindset to make it, to make the value come true in a very early phase. So what you're looking for here is that core idea that would drive the impact or the value of the project very early on. So one learning that we had in terms of pilot projects is if we get in too late, it's too late to create that core idea to gain the impact early. So we've put up a 5-step process for how to find that core idea and how to actually create that impact solution design, which initially becomes your overall plan. Okay, third method is the pulse check. The pulse check is about being in touch with your key stakeholders at least monthly. So we have this online tool that will ask you 6 basic questions. So for instance, are we creating impact? Are we collaborating effectively? Are you getting the support you need? And there will be similar questions like that. And we will ask each key stakeholder at least monthly what they think. So this is kind of, taking the pulse of whether the stakeholder satisfaction is on the right track. But the important part of this tool is not really to take the pulse. The important part is having the dialogue with stakeholders about this. So when we have the results, it's important always to get back and have the dialogue about, so what can we make different? What can we do different here? What should be the approach for this project going further? So this is actually the tool to keep you on track with stakeholder satisfaction. So now that was the impact core element. Now I'm going to talk about the flow core elements. The principle of flow is to have high intensity in your project and frequent interactions, because that will help you to continue to create continuous progression in the project. What we look for here is for the project to progress every week. We want to create a feeling that the project progresses every week because that creates motivation. That's why it's so important. So high intensity should be what we will try to go for. So the first method, and probably a lot of you have heard about this before, is to make sure that you have a core team that will be allocated about 50% or more, so that you're able actually to create an intensity to make the project move. And then it's about defining who's the core team and what would those resources be worth fighting for, right? So get those on board, and then you create a co-location for these people to meet. So this method would include a way to design a room, which could be virtual, if you have teams in different setups, to design a room that would support the collaboration of the project core team to work as good as possible. So we want to make sure that we reduce complexity in time and space, which is coordinating when to meet, because most projects use too much time to do that, and actually use the time to solve the complex problem in the project. That's what they're there for. So that's the core idea, and we use the rhythm in events, which is the second method within Flow, to define a fixed project heartbeat for stakeholder interaction to make the project progress in sprints. So what we do here is that we set up a fixed pace, which is kind of what we call the heartbeat, that will be the same each month, each week, each day. So when we were allocated 50%, we would know that the core team would meet, for instance, Monday, Tuesday, and then at Wednesday, we will look into the review of what we've done so far. Okay, so everyone will be in the project Monday and Tuesday, because otherwise it just won't work. So we create this fixed heartbeat, and we have, for instance, sprint planning going on in the start of the month. In the end of the month, every Thursday, for instance, we will do the sprint planning for the next sprint. And there's an essential part here in each of these heartbeats, which is the last thing that we will do in a week will be to invite a solution feedback team, people that we were not able to get on board in this project, and we will show them what we have produced during the last week, and they will give us feedback. How can we improve it? Is it great as it is? And if we even invite users, it will be even better. Think about what would happen if we invite customers to those kind of meetings. So that's what we want to try to do. Invite people in to give us feedback on what we're actually doing. And we would have what we call a review sprint meeting in the end of the month, where the project owner would participate, and we would show what we've done this month, and he or she will give us feedback on what we've actually done, whether we're on the right track, and we will have a discussion about, is this really creating business impact? Okay, so the idea here is to meet the project in its raw form, not too many glitter presentations in PowerPoint and stuff like that. We want to see what we've actually produced, have a real dialogue about what we're really delivering, and also look directly into the challenges and issues that we see while we do that. To support all this, we have the third method, which is to increase insight and commitment by using visual tools and also a visual plan to support the progression. You would know this from agile concepts such as Scrum or other concepts, but it's very much about putting things on the wall, making things tangible, because what happens when you put your post-it activity on the big poster is that you create commitment. Because it's, when I put it on, it's my responsibility to fix it. So the visual part is very important here. And we can deep dive into how does the poster look, but it's about creating that visibility that will make it easy to follow up and discuss coordination issues and have an overview of the project. So this method would also include what we call fast prototyping. We would draw, we would use index cards, we would put things on the walls to simulate some of that product or whatever the project is going to end up with. So using visualization to drive the flow of the project. Now I'll go into the leadership domain, core element. And here you will find a principle that we've been thinking a lot about and which we really think works. Because let me start with the last part of the principle being that you want to make the project happen. If you want to choose a CEO for your company, usually you will not look for how well certified that CEO would be. You would look for whether this person would be able to create results, making things happening. Those are the people we want to have leading projects as well. So we think it's very much about making the project happening instead of everything else. So pick those two, the project owner and the project leader in terms of who can make it happen. And then we need to embrace the uncertainty in the project. All projects are bound and grown up with an uncertainty because it's all unknown what we're doing. So instead of trying to reduce it and trying to avoid it and talk about predictability, we have to embrace the actual uncertainty and try to make it work in the best possible way, acknowledging that that's the conditions that we're working with. Not trying to discard it thinking we can surely engineer our way out of this, because that's not possible. Okay, so that's the main principle. So how do we make that happen in reality? What's the method? This is hard, because within leadership, this subject is so big, so many books have been written about this, so it's impossible to even go into it. So the approach here is that what counts for normal leadership in operational setups would also account for being the leader of a project. So let's take all the knowledge that we have and let's just say, let's play with the idea that you know that. What's then specific for making it happen with the project half-double approach? That's the things that we've put up here. So we kind of left the other 60% out of it, and the last 40% of kind of making this happen in your project is what we put up there. So what would we like? The first method is to have and be an active, committed, and engaged project owner. And this means, because this is a very essential point, that you need to support the project and ensure stakeholder satisfaction. This actually means that you have to show up. So there's been a lot of studies about critical success factors for what projects are successful. And one of the common denominators in all those studies is that the project owner were actually active. So that's how simple it is. You want someone who will have a certain management level, who will be active and willing to look into the eyes of the project in its raw form and have a dialogue about how to solve all those issues. And we think that the active project owner approach is about 4 levels. You have, first of all, the organizational level of removing idiocracy, making it easier for the project to proceed. It's about leading the project to impact. It's about facilitating the team and lead the individual. So the project owner should be more focused on the overall things, the organizational and the overall project, whereas the collaborative project leader should be focusing on leading the individual, be able to facilitate the team, but also to lead the project towards impact. So this is a teamwork, and that's very important. We want a project owner and we want a project leader who are very closely associated and would base their relationship on trust, not contractual, engagement. So this brings me to the second method, which is to be a collaborative project leader with a people-first approach to drive the project forward. A people-first approach. All projects consist of people. All projects are made of people. And yet most project management theory will tell us about how to set systems up for this. We need project managers or leaders who are able to focus on the human system and make that collaboration work. Usually that would require someone who actually has a domain insight to the actual project knowledge. If we're doing an IT project, I just have to know a few things about that IT system to pose the great questions and being able to facilitate a dialogue that's really relevant for the project. However, I do not need to be the expert in this. I need to be the expert in facilitating all those people who would know more than I. So that's about facilitating the team. I have to ask great questions, but I should also be the qualifier of stupid things, right? And that would need just a little insight. But I want to have a lot of focus on how to make sure that all the knowledge that are there in the room are kind of put into the project to make it happen. So that's the kind of people we're looking for, and that's why we put the facilitate the team and lead the individual in the focus of the project leader's approach. The other things are just as important, but if you cannot facilitate a team, you have a problem. Good. Last thing is to customize the project to the uniqueness of the project. This is just what Aaron talked about before. You need to make sure what kind of project do you really have in your hands. So how can I make sure that this project and the uniqueness of this project is actually tailored or customized to the governance that we have in the organization that we're about to approach and do the project in? So usually you will find that the actual governance or the best practice project models that we're using could to some extent help your project, but it could also sometimes be a barrier for making more iterations if you have a very complex project. It can be a barrier for having a very active project owner and not really using the governance board that much. So you need to make sure that you customize that project and what it needs to the overall organizational governance. So and you need to think about very early on in the project how you want to approach that, because it's going to come up sooner or later. That's the experience from each of the pilot projects. Okay, so those are the 3 tools related to that, or methods related to that. And then we have the last one, the local translation. And the important part about the local translation is that's actually the key. You can be very good with all of these methods and tools, but if you're not able to translate it into something that is of relevance for the people in the organization that you're in, it will never happen. So you need to, first of all, create that changed mindset of working differently, but you also need to be able to lead that whole team and make the project happen in where you are with the conditions that you're given. And that's a local translation. It's not easy, but it certainly is important. Okay, so so far so good. Those were the 9 methods so far, and you now have the opportunity to go out and explore each 3 of the methods, and we will give you an introduction of the method by each of the stands here, and then you can ask questions and we'll start a dialogue. We'll have 15 minutes with each station, and then we're going to play loud music again, which will kind of, make it impossible to talk more. And that would mean that you would have to flow to a new station. And we really haven't made a great setup for this. You will figure it out, we're pretty sure. So when the music starts, go to the next tool stand where you want to deep dive and ask questions into some of these methods. So to get there, you would of course need to know where are the stations. There you have them. So the impact case is right behind this corner. We're going to put this away. You will find the impact solution design over here. So if you kind of take your wheel like this, you'll see that it's going this direction. That could be your guide for later. So we'll have the pulse check in the room by the wardrobe. We will have number 4, the plus 50% allocation and co-location design on the small stage by the bar. We would have the visual planning just by the bar outside the room. And then in this corner down there, number 6, we'll have the project heartbeat and rhythm, which is this one. And inside that little door down there, we will have the active project owner. And the next, the collaborative project leader. And over there, by the other door, the customized to the uniqueness of your project. So, let's try it. We're going to use this. In a minute, we're going to start up. Flow to where you want to go.